Diddy, you know Diddy?
Diddy,
one of my best friends.
Okay.
Right? Okay. When you want to be a Kappa, you want to be Kappa, you want to be Alpha, whatever the f it is, okay? We're going to haze you and haze you and haze you until you are a Kappa.
He said the hallway lights turned red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then everything went silent. A voice on the radio whispered reset, and within seconds, the cameras dimmed, the doors clicked, and something began that even he couldn't fully explain. What Orlando Brown recorded inside those walls wasn't supposed to exist, at least not in a way that could ever be proven. But now, with voice memos, router logs, smart light data, and a courtroom ready to hear it all, the game has changed.
That's what happened. People sold their souls to Diddy. And then they're mad now because the hazing process was a little bit rougher than they thought.
This isn't just about gossip, rumors, or conspiracy. This is a federal trial centered on one of the most powerful names in music, Sean Diddy Combs. For decades, Diddy built a legacy of wealth, fame, and influence, positioning himself as untouchable, a mogul surrounded by secrets and silence. But when Brown, the troubled ex-Disney star, walked into court with a second phone full of hidden recordings and a legal deal that forced him to tell the truth or face prison himself, everything flipped. The allegations are heavy. The evidence is technical, and if it all connects, it could expose a world that's operated for years in the shadows. Lavish estates turned into private playgrounds, NDAs signed at the door, and coded phrases whispered over radios in the middle of the night. Prosecutors believe they can prove it. The defense says it's all a fantasy, but one thing is undeniable.
Nigga, you can't de-king a king. Why do you think I love Diddy so much? You're not gonna dethrone this man because he know how to get you there. By way of hazing you, I call it haze.
Orlando Brown didn't just tell a story, he brought receipts. And now, for the first time, we're about to walk into those hallways with him, one recording at a time. What really happened behind those mirrored doors? And what does it say about the industry as a whole? Keep watching, because this is the side of Hollywood they never wanted you to hear. Orlando Brown was once the wide-eyed, fast-talking kid from That's So Raven, a Disney Channel favorite who seemed destined for stardom. He had the kind of charisma that lit up every scene, but as the years passed, his life spiraled into a public unraveling, run-ins with the law, bizarre social media rants, and wild claims that often got him laughed off or dismissed. Most people assumed he was just another former child star lost in the chaos of fame, someone who fell too hard, too fast. But what no one saw coming was that this same man, once mocked for outlandish stories,
and we're gonna still do this. We're gonna still do this. It's not gonna stop. Take that. It's still gonna happen. The bitch got 3 million and we're still waking up in the morning, drinking cognac, screaming, bad boy, bad boy.
would become the center of a federal criminal investigation involving one of music's most powerful moguls, Sean Diddy Combs. It started with whispers, strange stories about lavish parties, closed-door events, and unusual routines. But when Brown accepted a federal subpoena and handed over recordings he secretly made at Diddy's estates, everything changed. His wild past, instead of burying his credibility, suddenly added depth to his claims. This wasn't just tabloid noise anymore. According to federal prosecutors, Orlando Brown had kept quiet for years about what he saw, what he heard, and what he lived through, but now he was ready to speak under oath.
You know, Diddy and Jay-Z, Auntie Sean and Auntie Yolanda. No matter how many contracts you try to take out on my life, no matter how many times you try to threaten my family or threaten people to stay away from me, no matter how many things you try to do to me and how many things you've tried to do to me, it ain't working. Don't play with somebody that you know got the drop.
Backed by audio evidence, metadata, and time-stamped recordings. It's the kind of twist that turns a story into a spectacle. The troubled actor, laughed out of the industry, now armed with digital receipts and the power to possibly bring down a global music empire. And whether people believe him or not, one thing is clear, he's not just talking anymore, he's testifying. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than another exclusive weekend, just another elite invite to one of Diddy's legendary gatherings.
I got on a plane at 5:30 a.m. for this party.
think half the people there were butt naked.
The kind whispered about in hotel lobbies and music studios, but rarely seen by outsiders. Orlando Brown had been around long enough to know what to expect. Designer everything, guest lists full of platinum names, and security tight enough to make a vault jealous. But something about this particular night felt off. It wasn't just the luxury, it was the precision, the routine, the way staff seemed to move like clockwork, and how certain areas of the estate seemed to operate on their own kind of rhythm. Brown would later say it felt staged, like people were playing roles in a script no one admitted existed. That's when he made a decision that would flip the entire narrative. He kept a second phone hidden, on airplane mode, silent and untraceable. When things felt too controlled, too quiet, too eerie, he turned it on just long enough to record. Not for clout, not for drama, for protection. In his words, something didn't feel right, and I knew I had to capture it because if I said it later, no one would believe me. What started as simple voice memos quickly turned into a digital trail. Recordings of hushed radio chatter, hallway footsteps, mechanical door resets, and late-night conversations that hinted at something much deeper than just partying. Brown didn't know then that his phone would become a key piece of federal evidence.
Would you be open to a plea bargain?
Well, it's not up to me. It's up to Mr. Combs, and I don't see it happening.
Why?
Because he believes he's innocent.
He just knew that what he was hearing and seeing didn't match the stories Diddy's world sold to the public. He wasn't documenting a wild night, he was documenting a pattern, and with each memo, the risk got bigger, because if anyone had caught him, there's no telling how that night would have ended, but he got out. And now, those recordings are front and center in one of the most closely watched trials in the entertainment world, where every second he captured could mean the difference between freedom and downfall. The first memo started simple, just Orlando whispering into his phone as he walked down a corridor lined with luxury. But what followed wasn't just background noise, it was the beginning of a pattern. Soft static crackled as a voice came over a security radio, using a term prosecutors would later call code. Heartbeat reset. Seconds after that, Brown's own voice noted that lights overhead had dimmed into a deep red hue, pulsing gently in sync, like a rhythm meant to signal something without speaking a word.
And what's more, he believes that he needs to stand up, not just for himself, for his family, and for everybody who's been targeted by the federal government.
He murmured about movement in the guest wing, specific doors being unlocked, figures being ushered through mirrored panels, and staff coordinating with barely audible phrases. These weren't just observations, they were timestamps. Moments locked into audio that prosecutors now say match up with logs from the estate's internal systems. On another memo, Brown describes hearing muffled shuffling in a hallway he wasn't supposed to be near, followed by doors clicking in sequence and another reset command over the radio. Then there were the references to linen carts, quick guest refreshes, and hallway routes that only staff should have known. One recording captured what sounded like a security guard saying, "Guest 3 ready," followed by a second voice confirming, "Heartbeat cart deployed." Brown, speaking in a tense whisper, said, "I don't know what this is, but I'm not staying past sunrise." The recordings didn't include graphic visuals or explicit content, but what they did have was context, ambient sounds, footsteps, faint music leaking through the walls, and a pattern of timing that mirrored the home's automation systems down to the second.
Well, Bill and Sade, accepting a plea agreement would mean that Sean Combs would have to admit to trafficking and force. And today he made it very clear that was not going to happen. Diddy maintained all along these encounters involved consenting adults and plans to take his chances that a jury agrees.
Brown even caught chatter referencing NDA check-ins, digital tablets for guest waivers, and a reminder to switch hallway feeds to privacy mode. It was all subtle, quiet, coded, but when stacked together, prosecutors say these voice memos paint a story of control, concealment, and ritual. They weren't just about a strange night, they were the foundation of a case built on surveillance, routine manipulation of smart systems, and a network of silence. Brown had unknowingly captured the soundtrack of something bigger than a party, and the court was now listening to every word. For prosecutors, the voice memos alone weren't enough. What made them explosive was how they aligned with cold, unforgiving data. Every time Orlando Brown turned on that second phone, even for just a few seconds, it left behind invisible fingerprints, metadata that told a story far beyond his words. That's what caught the attention of federal digital forensics teams. They pulled router logs from the estate, maintenance records, smart lighting overrides, and building access controls, then matched them against the exact moments Brown's memos were recorded.
They have that opinion, strongly held opinion, that there's celebrity tapes, that they've kind of conflated Epstein, and you mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell and all of these things into Diddy. There's this idea that somehow this is Epstein redux or something.
What they found stunned them. The phone's identifier, unique and traceable, showed up inside restricted guest wings precisely when Brown claimed he was there, even though he never logged in officially or connected to any Wi-Fi. In one case, a voice memo captured him saying "second corridor, west wing," followed by a flicker of network activity where the phone pinged an access point named guest APN2 before going dark again. That network blip was recorded within the same 5-second window as the memo. Even more damning, the estate's lighting log showed manual overrides, lights dimming at 1:03 a.m. just as Brown whispered, "They're turning the lights red again." And when digital forensic lead agent Lynn Rivas took the stand, she confirmed under oath that waveform scans of the files revealed no signs of tampering, no edits, no cuts, no inserted clips. Every file matched the phone's internal OS log down to battery percentage and internal timestamps. She called it a digital mirror of real events. Defense attorneys tried to dismiss it as coincidence.
Isn't that, to my mind, that's one of the bigger hurdles in selecting a jury this coming week, is that there is, at least anecdotally, when I talk to people,
saying the phone could have auto-synced or someone else might have used similar phrasing. But prosecutors weren't done. They presented sealed affidavits showing that Brown's phone identifier didn't just show up once. It showed up in restricted smart light controller logs, hallway proximity scans, and even a digital linen order marked refresh with a note that read, "Use heartbeat cart." The evidence was building not just in weight, but in precision. And for a jury, that kind of pattern is hard to ignore. It's one thing to say you witnessed something. It's another thing to prove, second by second, that you were right there, inside a system designed to hide itself. The memos gave the story a voice, the metadata gave it a spine, and when the two locked together, the prosecution's case gained a terrifying kind of clarity. Once Orlando Brown's recordings were authenticated and the metadata locked in, the prosecution turned their attention to a different kind of evidence: people. And slowly, the wall of silence that surrounded Diddy's inner circle began to crack. It started with Roger Bonds, a former security chief who once worked Diddy's private events and estates. He turned over old spreadsheets, logs of guest arrivals, private staff shifts, door lock overrides, even lighting control instructions. One entry matched a memo Brown had recorded, detailing an unexplained hallway shift labeled guest wing shadow pass, logged at exactly the same time Brown whispered about staff moving people quietly through the side doors. Bonds didn't say much publicly, but the document spoke volumes. Then came Olivia Martinez, a state supply coordinator who'd worked with Diddy's event teams for years. She testified about the heartbeat cart, a special linen cart used exclusively in high priority guest situations. When asked why it was called that, she said it had red interior LEDs, a visual cue for urgent, silent servicing. Prosecutors tied one of those carts to a guest refresh order that aligned down to the minute with one of Brown's memos. Still, that wasn't the only testimony adding pressure. A lighting technician, Tyler Blake, told the court that manual overrides for hallway lights were extremely rare and always required memo documentation. But the weekend Brown was recording, 4 overrides, 0 memos. He paused when asked if that had ever happened before. "Not once," he replied. Meanwhile, a third-party event coordinator said they'd been instructed to disable select hallway cameras to ensure guest comfort, especially during after-hours activities. Defense attorneys pushed back hard, arguing this was standard protocol for protecting privacy and high-end hospitality. But the sheer number of overlaps with Brown's recordings made that explanation feel increasingly thin. The court wasn't being asked to believe in one man's version of the truth. They were watching pieces fall into place from multiple disconnected sources. And every time someone tried to downplay it, another voice stepped forward with one more detail that matched. In isolation, these were just odd choices: dim lights, linen carts, silent doors. But together they formed something much harder to explain, a system that appeared built to shield something from view. Brown had kicked the door open, and now the people who once worked behind it were starting to talk. From the moment federal charges were announced, Sean "Diddy" Combs made one thing clear: he wasn't going to back down, and he definitely wasn't going to plead guilty. Flanked by a high-powered legal team, and dressed in court like the mogul he still believed himself to be, Diddy rejected every plea offer that came his way, even ones that could have significantly reduced his sentence. His message: he's innocent. Every act prosecutors are labeling coercive or manipulative, he insists, involved consenting adults, private spaces, and no crime. According to his team, this entire case is the result of opportunists, people trying to take down a black billionaire who built his empire without asking for permission. And at the center of their counterattack is a relentless push to discredit Orlando Brown. They've labeled him unstable, inconsistent, and desperate, pointing to past arrests, media meltdowns, and a Nevada firearms case that could land him in serious trouble unless he plays along with the feds. Diddy's lawyers argue that Brown isn't cooperating because he wants justice. He's doing it because he wants a deal. They're not just challenging his recordings, they're attacking his motives, saying the plea agreement hanging over his head makes anything he says suspect. But prosecutors aren't buying it. They point to a specific clause in Brown's cooperation agreement: if he lies, exaggerates, or even bends the truth, the deal is void and he's back on the hook. In short, he has every reason to get it right. Still, Diddy's defense team is moving aggressively. They've called in hospitality consultants to explain away camera blackouts and lighting dips as normal VIP treatment. They've submitted documents showing other estates use heartbeat lighting schemes as a design element. And they're preparing to argue that the entire tech stack Brown's team is hyping up is standard smart home functionality. Nothing sinister, just misunderstood. Their strategy is twofold: blur the lines between luxury and secrecy and turn the trial into a credibility war. It's not about proving Brown lied, it's about planting enough doubt to make the jury hesitate. After all, if even one juror buys the argument that this was just the messy logistics of managing A-list parties, that could be enough to tip the scales. Diddy's betting his freedom on that sliver of uncertainty, but with more recordings queued up and expert witnesses ready to tie every data point back to Brown's memos, that gamble is looking riskier by the day. He's not just fighting for his reputation anymore, he's fighting to stay out of a federal cell. What started as a criminal case against one man has now cracked open something much bigger, an industry scrambling to protect itself from the storm it never saw coming. As Orlando Brown's memos played out in court and prosecutors tied every strange detail to real data points, guest refresh carts, hallway light shifts, silent door logs, the rest of Hollywood began to realize this wasn't just a trial, it was a warning. Major talent agencies quietly began rewriting their private event safety policies, requiring clearer phone policies, signed digital waivers, and even live documentation teams unaffiliated with any event host. High-end insurers, who once focused on liability for spilled champagne or minor injuries, are now demanding pre-event audits of lighting systems, door sensor setups, and staff communication logs. One top insurer even announced an overhaul of their coverage models, stating publicly that the emerging risk profile of elite entertainment gatherings has changed dramatically. Behind the scenes, artists and performers are talking too. No one wants to be caught in the next version of this storm, and many now say they're turning down certain invites, especially ones that involve NDAs at the door and phones locked in Faraday pouches. But it doesn't stop there. Lawmakers in 2 states have already added Orlando Brown's name to a list of key witnesses scheduled to testify in hearings tied to a new bill, the Creative Industry Guest Safety Act. If passed, the bill would fund anonymous reporting hotlines and enforce mandatory training for private security teams at high net worth events. Advocacy groups have seized the moment, praising Brown's testimony as proof that personal recordings, when used the right way, can fill the gap when traditional systems fail. They say his case exposes how deeply entertainment culture has normalized secrecy under the guise of exclusivity. Some have even begun pushing for federal guidelines around private estate rentals, proposing rules that would require third-party observers for multi-day celebrity events. And in a rare show of unity, several major music labels have quietly urged their top talent to avoid public support of Diddy, at least until the trial ends, fearing brand fallout if the verdict doesn't swing in his favor. The message is clear. The rules are changing fast. The systems that once protected the elite from exposure are now being re-examined under a microscope, and whether or not Diddy walks free, the fallout has already begun rewriting the very culture he once helped shape. The industry that made him is now watching him fall and trying desperately not to go down with him. The courtroom is no longer just a place for arguments. It's a battleground where every word, every second of audio, and every flicker of light is being dissected with surgical precision. As Orlando Brown took the stand, the room tensed. Prosecutor Celia Grant opened with one question: "Is that your voice on the recordings?" Brown looked straight ahead and said, "Yes, every word." What followed wasn't just testimony, it was a full-scale digital presentation. Prosecutors played his memos in real time, syncing each voice note with router pings, lighting dim outs, and hallway access logs. The lights in the recordings pulsed, the logs blinked, and every system, every bit of technology told the same story. Someone was controlling the environment from the shadows. A still shot showed a linen cart labeled "Refresh" appearing in a hallway exactly 37 seconds after Brown recorded the phrase, "They're moving with the heartbeat." Then came the kicker, an unedited voicemail left on Brown's hidden phone by a staff coordinator saying, "We'll have the heartbeat upgraded and ready." When the defense tried to claim the phrase meant nothing, the judge overruled, citing repeated evidence that heartbeat was internal lingo for camera and lighting overrides. Expert witnesses testified that sound fingerprints, background ventilation hum, faint music bleed, echo placement, all matched a specific wing of the estate. A digital forensics expert confirmed there were no splices, no edits, no data corruption. The phone had no SIM, no internet sync, meaning the files existed in raw, isolated form. Then came the blow the defense couldn't spin. 4 manual lighting overrides that weekend, each matching the timing of a memo, and none of them documented by staff. When cross-examination came, the defense went in hard, trying to paint Brown as unstable, self-serving, and motivated by a deal. But Brown stood firm, saying, "This isn't about a deal, it's about what happened. And I recorded it because I knew they'd never believe me without proof." The jury sat silent, watching his words line up with timestamps, logs, and visuals. On paper, it looked perfect, maybe too perfect. And that's where the defense saw its only chance: create just enough doubt to make this look like coincidence, chaos, or misunderstanding. As prosecutors rapped, they reminded the jury, "We didn't ask you to take his word for it. We brought you the data. We brought you the timeline. We brought you the truth." And now, with closing arguments looming, it all comes down to a single question: do the recordings tell a story of corruption and control, or are they just fragments of a misunderstood night inside a high-profile world built on secrecy? Either way, the verdict won't just decide Diddy's future. It could change the way power, privacy, and protection operate in the entertainment world forever. This trial isn't just about whether one man broke the law, it's about whether the system that made him will finally be forced to answer for the secrets it's protected for decades. Orlando Brown might not be the hero anyone expected, but in a world where NDAs silence truth and money buries memory, sometimes it takes someone unpredictable to break the pattern. His voice memos aren't flashy, they're raw, grainy, filled with static, whispers, and tension. But layered with the cold precision of metadata, building access logs, and forensic validation, they've become something more. A window into a machine most people never knew existed. Diddy's defense insists this is all a misunderstanding, a smear job built on desperation and noise. But prosecutors are betting the jury will see through the fog and recognize what they're really looking at. Not coincidence, but coordination. Not chaos, but control. And if the verdict falls against Diddy, it won't just mark the downfall of one of music's most powerful figures. It could trigger a shift across an entire industry, one where silence has long been the price of entry. The jury's decision is coming. The stakes have never been higher, and one way or another, the truth, however dark, however uncomfortable, is already out. If this is just the beginning, then we're about to find out how deep the rabbit hole really goes.